Awesome. Good morning. I'm Dr. Geana Mitchell. I'm presenting today with Dr. Elisha Wohleb and Dr. Leane Skinner. And what we're going to be discussing today are noteworthy changes in APA 7th edition. So I'm going to give an overview and talk about specific in-text citations between the two editions. And then Elisha is going to talk about inclusive and bias-free language and give us some information and updates on paper formatting. And finally, Leane will be talking about actual teaching resources, and she's got some links to share. Some of these I had not seen before, so it's some really good information about actually teaching APA 7th edition. Okay, so here are the two manuals, the 6th edition and the 7th edition. In October of 2019, the APA updated its manual in October. The 7th edition replaces the 6th edition published in 2009. During the last decade, many things have changed. Citing online material is much more commonplace. Using inclusive and bias-free language is increasingly important, and technology used by researchers has changed. The APA 7th edition addresses many of these changes, providing more extensive guidelines. Some of the changes that we will be discussing today, there are minor changes in how to cite sources. That's mainly what I will be discussing. There will be more examples and easier guidelines for citing online sources, including social media, podcasts, and YouTube videos. And I know there's been a question in the past about how to cite some of these, so it does give extensive guidelines regarding online media. Recommended usage of singular they and the personal pronouns, specific formatting guidelines for student papers and also academic papers, including sample papers. And Dr. Skinner is going to talk more about that. So, notable changes in references and in-text citations. So I've got some examples here. The first one is the 6th edition. The second one is the 7th edition. So you can see the difference in how these citations have been cited. So the first one is the publisher location is no longer included if it is a book or similar medium. Okay, so you can see in the first citation, New York is included, and in the second one, it is not. So I know a lot of times we use the NBEA yearbooks for references, and I remembered that we always put Reston, Virginia in the reference, in the citation. So the location will no longer be included. Excuse me. Okay, in-text citations are now shortened. As for in-text citations, any reference with more than 3 authors can now be shortened to the first author, and et al. Previously, only references with 6 or more would be shortened this way. So we've got examples here. I'm sorry. We've got examples here on number 2 with the 6th edition, and they put all of the 4 names, and then in the 7th edition we're just doing the author and then et al. Okay, the next one talks about the authors that can be listed in the reference list. Up to 20 authors can now be listed in the reference list before needing to omit others. Previously, only 6 would be displayed before omitting the rest. Okay, so we've got examples here. So 6th edition, you would list the first 6, and then in 7th edition, we can list 20, which 20 authors is a whole lot of authors, but I guess in some cases this does apply. All right, and then number 4, DOIs are formatted now as URLs. So instead of using the DOI location, it is now formatted as an actual URL. So it's https // and then the location. All right, in citing web pages, we used to have to say retrieved from. Website URLs are no longer need to be preceded with retrieved from unless there is also a retrieval date. So this example shows the 6th edition, and then the 7th edition omits retrieved from. And then the next one is citing ebooks. Ebooks no longer require the type of ebook to be listed. So if it's a Kindle or whatever type of ebook that it may be, you don't have to list that anymore. And you can see the differences here with that element eliminated. And the last thing that I'm covering today is contributions other than authors. And as a college professor teaching research and research papers, and I'm at a community college now, but we also do research papers. I've had students ask me over the years, well, how do I need to cite a movie or whatever, something other than a book or a journal or a magazine? So they have given us guidelines on how to contribute to other authors. So if it's a film, it would be the director. A TV series would be the executive producers. A podcast would be the host of an episode. The webinar would be the instructor. I know we're getting a lot more of those lately. Online streaming videos, the person or group who uploaded the video, and then a photograph would be the photographer. Okay, so next, Dr. Wohleb will discuss inclusive and bias-free language and paper formatting, and I am going to turn it over to her.
Thanks, Geana. If you'll go ahead and go to the next slide, the inclusive and bias-free language, I think, is something that has really, in the past few years, become an initiative all over the place. I know at Auburn University, it's something that we deem is very important and making it happen. So it was good when we looked at the 7th edition of APA, we saw that this was addressed. So what does this mean? Inclusive and bias-free language, writing inclusively and without bias. So that's kind of what we're looking at going towards the future. And there's a complete separate chapter in APA 7th edition that addresses just this. So what it does is it helps authors reduce the bias around topics. And this goes for gender, age, disability, race, ethnic identity, and sexual orientation. So it's very sensitive to labels. So some examples are the singular they or their is endorsed as a gender neutral program. I can remember, this is really bad, but I have a student that's getting ready to defend her dissertation. And so she called me, she's like, okay, 7th is out. Of course, we've been writing 6th this whole time. And she said, 7th is out. What do you want me to do? And I was like, no, we are going with the times. You better do 7th edition. And so she called me and she told me all these changes, and a lot of it were with the pronouns and the way that we had written it. And I said, we've gone too far. We're going to have to keep going with 6th edition at this point. So it is going to take some getting used to. Descriptive phrases such as people living in poverty are preferred over adjectives such as the poor. So that's a bit harsh right there, but I know we've seen this when we're writing in the academic world. Instead of broad categories such as over 65, you should use age ranges such as 65 to 75, not to label anybody. Inclusive and bias-free language, again, writing inclusively and without bias. The guidelines help authors we've already talked about that. Geana, I'm going to touch on these highlights and then we'll go to the next one so that we can see some examples, okay? The singular they or theirs endorsed is a gender neutral pronoun. Instead of using adjectives as noun to label groups of people, descriptive phrases are preferred. And instead of broad categories, you should use exact ranges. So go to the next slide and we can see some examples. Okay, so here's the X means that's the way we used to do it, and the check mark means this is the way that we can do it now. So the singular they, a researcher's career depends on how often he is cited. And now you should say a researcher's career depends on how often they are cited. Each examiner submitted his or her assessment, and now you say their assessment. So labels, you need to be sensitive to that now. The poor before was acceptable, and now it's people living in poverty. Transsexuals, prior 6th edition was acceptable, and now you'll say transgender people. And the last one, over 65, was acceptable, people aged 65 to 75. Before, Asian participants, and now Vietnamese, Cambodian, and Thai participants. So those are just some examples of, you know, that inclusivity, bias-free language, and what that looks like. Okay, keep going. We'll talk a little bit about paper formatting, and this is important. So it used to be Times New Roman, 12-point font. That's what you used. I have that in my syllabus. So that was kind of the norm. But now APA 7th edition allows additional fonts to choose from. So Times New Roman, 12-point is still acceptable, of course. Arial 11, Georgia 11, Calibri 11, and Lucida Sans Unicode 10. All of those are acceptable fonts to choose from when you're writing. This almost made me a little sad when I saw this, no more running head. Not that I like to use it, but it was something that I could always tell when my graduate students and my undergraduate students were really looking at APA to see how exactly to write a perfect paper. And if they had that running head with the lowercase h and the title, all caps after it, I knew that they were really looking it up and they were trying. But no more running head in 7th edition. So that's a big change. Heading styles. So they're just updated a little bit. I think that they are a little not so specific, I guess, more, I don't know, the norm, I guess what you could say. Level 1, it's, go back up. Yeah, this is what you can see. I'm going to go over it and then you can see the number 1 is center, bold-faced, uppercase. I'm pointing like you can see what I'm pointing to. Number 2 is flush left, bold-faced, uppercase, and lowercase. That was what it was before. Now it's flush left, bold-faced, title case heading. 3rd, flush left, bold-faced, italic, title case heading. And the text below each one shows you what that looks like. And then indented, bold-faced, title case heading, ending with a period. And then 5th, you can see that as well. So just T90 changes going on there, but still what things we need to be aware of. Okay, I think that Dr. Skinner is going to go over some great teaching strategies for you. So I'm going to mute because she's got some really good resources to share.
All right, thank you, Dr. Wohleb. So this first one, just a cute little cartoon that I found, you know, because students are always saying, well, you know, why do I have to understand APA? How is it relevant? And so anyway, cute little cartoon here. Geana, go ahead and go to the next slide. So this was just a couple of articles that I found, basically giving us some stats or some information about errors that we see. So the first one is 1 out of every 3 reference pages in several experimental psychology journals had errors. And then the second one was just where they reviewed doctoral student dissertation proposals and found that 1 in 3 citations had some sort of error. And I know we talk about all the time where, almost everybody says after they graduate, they finish their dissertation, they go back and they're looking at something and they find an error. And so, this is something that's important that we need to talk about, and we need to think about how we can communicate this information to our students. Okay, Geana, go ahead. I also found, because when we think about how we're going to teach, what our teaching strategies will be and what we're going to focus on, I found in reviewing the literature that these are the top 4 areas that students typically have errors. And so the first one is the format and use of in-text citation. And I've just put there where you can find that in the 7th edition. And this is the 7th edition book. And inside the cover, I don't know if you can see it. I have my background because honestly, I think it's appropriate because if I'm writing or thinking, I really like to be at the beach. And of course, that's not something I can do anytime soon. So I just kind of am pretending I'm there. But inside, you can't see it. Inside the front cover and inside the back cover are like little cheat sheets almost. Inside the front cover, there is a table on the levels of headings that Dr. Wohleb discussed. There's also just short samples of basic in-text citation styles. And in the back cover, there is a list of about 6 or 7 common references at a glance is what they call it. So really handy there. The second most common error is format of references, and then format and use of direct quotes, and then proper use of headings and subheadings. Okay, Dr. Dr. Mitchell. So teaching strategies, and these are just some examples of things that you can do. The first one is KWL, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with KWL, which is where you would ask the students at the beginning, what do you already know about APA? And that may be really appropriate now that we have a new edition, just to find out, what they think they know already about it. And then what they would like to know or questions they may have. And then, of course, at the end of the instruction, you would find out what they've learned. The second bullet that's listed there, in reviewing the literature, there are several studies where they look at what works or what has worked with students as far as improving their writing in the application of APA. And there's where they look at APA, an APA template, giving the students an APA template, giving some students an APA checklist, and then giving some students both. And what they found is that the APA template and the APA checklist, the students who had both did better and performed better with their APA. And then the last one there is just APA quick reference. That's something I do in my technology class. I have my students create a quick reference card, like the ones you can get at the bookstore that are laminated. And I was just thinking that, that also would be something that would be good. And you could even have the students create it, and that would help reinforce what they need to know about APA. The third bullet there, have students purchase APA publication manual early in the program. And the next one is something that, I feel pretty strongly about. We can't expect our students to memorize everything in this book. I mean, even though we've used 6th edition for years, I still did not have everything memorized. And so, we need to teach them how to use the book versus trying to memorize it. So you may want to give them, an open source quiz versus a closed source quiz, because you want them to be able to find the information in the manual rather than memorizing it. Reinforce APA in as many courses as possible. Again, practice somewhat makes perfect sometimes. And so, you want to have them practice it in various courses. Cover some of the common errors with them, again, teaching them how to find the information in the book. And with that, a couple of exercises that you could do. One would be giving them a sample paper that has errors, and then have the students try to identify what the errors are. Another example would be letting them select a topic, or you could give them a topic, and then once they have their topic, they have to go and locate a book, a journal article, dictionary, a YouTube video, and you could give them as many different types of sources as you'd like to on a topic, and then have them write the reference in the correct format. And especially some of the newer, like the YouTube videos that we may see now cited. Another example is having students do a peer review So they're reviewing each other's paper. And this link is just a link to an article about the criteria, an example of criteria that could be used in a rubric for those student peer reviews. So I've got that there that you could take a look at if you want to. Hey, Geana. Okay, this is a pretty neat site. Can you click on that for me, Geana?
Yes, I have that pulled up. Let's see. I think this.
You should be able just to go to share screen and you'll see your choices there. Okay, there you go. Okay, so this is a website, an APA website where there's, click on the style and grammar guidelines for me, please, Geana. The first link there, across the top there. So here's where you can click in and get information, and these are kind of some of the hot topics. What are the order of the pages, the verb tense, information about plagiarism, punctuation, spelling, capitalization, so forth. So that's a pretty good resource. And then click on instructional aids frame and scroll down. Okay, so here you have some tutorials and some webinars. So those are tutorials and webinars that you can use with your students. You have handouts and guides, and you have sample papers. And what they say here is that they're going to be adding additional sample papers. So I think this will be a good resource to continue to go back and look at how they update that page. Will you click on the handouts and guides for me? So here, there's a handout on what's new in this edition. There's a quick reference for a reference quick guide there, the heading levels. So again, some of the areas that tend to be areas of weakness, they have little one-page handouts that you could use. So, I think this is something that would also be very helpful and a source that you could refer your students to. Then if you will, click on the sample papers on the right-hand side. Okay, so here they have an annotated student sample, and Geana mentioned earlier in the presentation that there are now guidelines for both a student paper and also a professional paper. And so they have those here with the annotated. Here, will you click on that first one, the annotated student sample?
Oh, it's downloading. Sorry.
That's okay. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it because we're going to run out of time. You don't have to do it. But anyway, go in and check that out. And it has notes on it. So, you could even use this paper to give the students and have them go through and make notes about what's relevant to the new edition by using their manual. Okay, we can go back to the PowerPoint presentation. I think there's just one more step there.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, PowerPoint. Let's see, PowerPoint. Okay.
Okay, this is another really good source. I'm sure most of you've probably used it, the Purdue, and they tend to keep it updated. And so this is something that we share with our students as well and give them as a resource because there are examples there. And so very good source. So those are the two primary sources that, that we use with our students and, give them an opportunity to practice in as many classes as possible so that they can become familiar with what they need to do as far as APA. And that concludes my section. We'll be happy to answer any questions.